In the morning's quiet stillness, a lone figure gazed out of his penthouse window, high above the bustling city streets. Ethan Caldwell, a 40-year-old self-made millionaire, had everything most people only dreamed of: wealth, power, and influence. Yet, as he sipped his perfectly brewed coffee from an antique porcelain cup, there was an undeniable emptiness in his chest. Something was missing, though he couldn't quite name it. He had built an empire of luxury hotels across the country, each adorned with crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and walls lined with priceless art. Yet, standing in the silence of his sprawling home, he felt like an outsider in his own life. This wasn't about money, he had plenty of that. It was about connection, purpose, and perhaps something he'd long forgotten: love. As his eyes drifted toward the street below, he spotted her again. A woman in her mid-30s carrying a battered leather tote bag and a bouquet of wildflowers. She walked the same path, her red hair catching the light like fire every morning as she passed his newest hotel project. There was something about her, a quiet dignity in how she moved, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders but couldn't dim her resolve. Ethan leaned closer to the window, curiosity sparking in his otherwise predictable routine. She always stopped by a weathered bench in the park, sharing a loaf of bread with the birds and sometimes an older man who sat there. That morning, she helped a boy fix the chain on his rusted bicycle, laughing softly as the child beamed up at her. She reminded Ethan of something he hadn't seen in years: kindness without expectation. Who was she? And why, despite her modest appearance, did she feel so much more accurate than the polished, social-climbing women in his circle? He couldn't say, but he knew one thing: he had to find out. Not as Ethan Caldwell, the wealthy tycoon. No, he wanted her to see him for who he was beneath the suits, the headlines, and the wealth. But how could he enter her world without shattering the delicate mystery that drew him in? The answer came as swiftly as the thought. He wouldn't approach her as himself. He would blend into her world, leave the trappings of his wealth behind, and meet her as an ordinary man. It was a gamble, but one Ethan was willing to take. After all, what did he have to lose? What unfolded over the next few weeks would change his life and hers. A journey of hidden truths, unforeseen challenges, and an unforgettable love was about to begin. But at what cost? If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to find a genuine connection, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel now to follow this heartwarming tale of love, sacrifice, and rediscovery. It might remind you of the extraordinary power of small acts of kindness. Don't miss it. The idea lingered in Ethan Caldwell's mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. He watched the woman for days, her unspoken grace drawing him closer. Yet he knew he couldn't approach her as the man he was, a billionaire with a name that carried more weight than he liked. Wealth had its privileges, but it also came with expectations. Everyone wanted something from him: a deal, a favor, a piece of his empire. He tried to step into her world unnoticed, to learn about her life without the shadow of his status influencing her perception. It was a brisk Sunday morning when Ethan took the first step. He called his assistant, Greg, who had loyally served him for years. "Greg," Ethan began, adjusting his cufflinks as he paced his expansive office. "I need a favor. Something unconventional." Greg raised a brow, already bracing himself. "Unconventional, sir?" "Yes. I need plain clothes. Worn, basic, something no one would associate with me. And cancel my meetings for the next 2 weeks." Greg blinked. "Are you going undercover?" "In a sense," Ethan replied, his lips curving into a faint smile. "I need to see the world through a different lens. And I need your discretion." Ethan stood in front of his mirror the following day, hardly recognizing himself. Gone were the tailored suits and polished shoes. Instead, he wore faded jeans, a thrift store jacket, and scuffed sneakers. He even ruffled his usually immaculate hair. For the first time in years, he felt anonymous. The man who stared back at him wasn't Ethan Caldwell, the hotel magnate. He was just a man about to embark on an uncharted path. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Ethan arrived at the park, positioning himself near the bench where she always stopped. The cool air nipped at his face, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled comfort he was used to. Around him, joggers passed by in sleek athletic gear, office workers clutched steaming cups of coffee, and dog walkers exchanged friendly nods. Then he saw her. The woman with the red hair and the battered tote bag moved with the same quiet elegance that had captivated him. She carried a small brown BA suitcase beggarishly back with Ed bread wafting this time. As she approached the bench, Ethan felt his heart race, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. She sat down, her face lighting up as the older man from the previous mornings joined her. She broke the loaf of bread in half, handing a piece to him. They exchanged a few words, their laughter soft but genuine. Ethan couldn't hear what they said, but he didn't need to. It was the warmth in her actions, the authenticity of her smile, that spoke volumes. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to bridge the gap. Finally, he mustered the courage to approach. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rougher than usual as he tried to mask his natural refinement. "Would you mind if I sat here?" The woman looked up, her green eyes meeting his. For a moment, she studied him, her gaze neither suspicious nor inviting but simply curious. "Of course," she replied, sliding over to make space. As Ethan sat down, he couldn't help but notice the details he'd missed from afar. The tiny freckles dusting her nose, the faint scar above her brow, and the way she seemed to radiate a quiet strength despite the apparent signs of life that hadn't been easy. "I'm Ethan," he said, catching himself just before offering his real last name. "Ethan Reed." She smiled faintly.
"I'm Amelia."
Amelia Clark. Her voice was soft, tinged with a northern accent that gave her words a melodic quality. Over the next few minutes, they exchanged pleasantries, small talk about the weather and the park. Amelia's words were thoughtful, and her observations were rich with detail. She spoke of the changing leaves, the quiet charm of the older man she shared bread with, and the way the park seemed alive at sunrise. Ethan was captivated by her words and how she saw the world, with an appreciation for the small, often overlooked moments. As their conversation unfolded, Amelia pulled out a second loaf of bread and offered him a piece. "It's too much for just the two of us," she said, her tone light but sincere. Ethan hesitated, the gesture catching him off guard. He wasn't used to kindness without strings attached. Finally, he accepted, taking a small bite and nodding his thanks. As the morning stretched, Ethan realized something. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals, deadlines, or his empire. He was just present, and it felt strangely liberating. In the following days, Ethan returned to the park every morning at 7:15. Each time, he sat a little closer to Amelia, their conversations growing more personal with each passing day. She told him about her job as a part-time librarian, her struggles caring for her ailing mother, and her dream of becoming an artist, though she confessed she hadn't touched a paintbrush in years. Ethan listened intently, his life increasingly distant with each story she shared. Amelia's world was resilient and quiet strength, a stark contrast to the polished veneer of his high society existence. One morning, she spoke of her mother, Nancy, with a mix of fondness and worry. "She used to be a teacher," Amelia said, her gaze distant. "English literature. Even now, when the pain gets too much, she recites poetry. Says it helps her forget for a little while." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He thought of the private medical care his family had access to, the millions he'd spent on unnecessary luxuries. At the same time, people like Amelia and her mother struggled to afford the basics. As their connection deepened, so did Ethan's guilt. Each time Amelia spoke of her struggles, he fought the urge to confess, to tell her who he was and that he could help her. But the fear of losing the fragile bond they'd built kept him silent. Behind the scenes, Ethan couldn't resist the urge to act. He contacted his foundation, discreetly arranging for a grant to cover Nancy's medical expenses. He ensured the rent on Amelia's modest apartment was reduced and even worked with a local community center to offer free art classes. He justified his actions as kindness, but deep down, he knew they were rooted in something more selfish, the hope that he could ease her burdens without revealing the truth. Yet, Each act of hidden generosity tightened the knot in his chest. How long could he keep up the charade? How long before the weight of his deception shattered everything? The morning sunlight filtered through the trees as Ethan sat on the park bench, the familiar scent of freshly baked bread wafting from Amelia's tote bag. Their conversations had become a cherished ritual, each morning revealing new pieces of Amelia's life that left him inspired and burdened. Amelia's soft and genuine laughter eased his soul, but her quiet struggles haunted him. The medical bills she worried about, the exhaustion she hid beneath her radiant smile, and her fading dream of painting reminded Ethan of the chasm between their worlds. Every moment of joy he witnessed felt tinged with guilt, knowing he had silently interfered in her life. But this morning, Amelia's usual cheer was replaced by a furrowed brow. She handed Ethan a letter, her hands trembling slightly. "It's from the foundation that approved my mom's treatment," she said, her voice cautious. "It's strange. Everything's been processed so quickly, almost too perfectly." Ethan kept his expression neutral, though his heart raced. He glanced at the letter, recognizing the foundation's logo, his foundation, and the discreet signature of its administrator. "Maybe you just got lucky," he offered carefully, meeting her eyes. Amelia tilted her head, studying him. "I don't know. Things like this don't happen to people like us." She paused. "I guess I should be grateful, but something about it doesn't feel real." Before Ethan could respond, Amelia glanced at her watch. "I should get going," she said, gathering her bag. "My mom's appointment is later, and I must prep tonight's dinner." As she walked away, Ethan felt the weight of his lies crushing him. Amelia was too brilliant not to connect the dots eventually. He had meddled too much and crossed too many lines. He needed to tell her the truth, but how could he risk destroying the fragile bond they'd built? That evening, at his penthouse, Ethan pored over plans with Greg. The foundation was set to announce several new initiatives, many inspired by his time with Amelia. He hoped they would help her see his intentions when the truth came out. "Sir," Greg said cautiously, "you can't keep this up. She's going to find out. If she hears it from anyone but you." "I know," Ethan interrupted, his voice heavy with regret. "I'll tell her. I just need to find the right moment." But the right moment came sooner than he anticipated. Amelia arrived at the park the following day with an unusual stiffness in her stride. She carried 2 cups of tea, her expression guarded. Ethan's heart sank as she sat beside him. "I met with Sarah yesterday," Amelia said, her tone unreadable. "She's a nurse at the clinic. She mentioned the foundation that's covering my mom's treatment, and she recognized your name." Ethan froze, his carefully constructed world of secrets unraveling in a heartbeat. "Ethan Caldwell," she continued, her voice tight, "chairman of the Caldwell Foundation, owner of half the luxury hotels in this city." "Amelia, let me explain," Ethan began, but she held up a hand. "Explain what?" she said, her voice rising. "That you lied about who you are? That you pretended to understand my life while secretly controlling it?" "I never meant to hurt you," Ethan said earnestly. I wanted to know you, the real you, not someone who sees me for my money." Amelia's green eyes burned with betrayal. "And you thought the best way to do that was to deceive me? To play God with my life?" Her words cut deep because he knew she was right. "Everything I did because I care about you," he said softly. "Because I fell in love with you." Amelia's breath hitched, but her expression remained steely. "Love isn't built on lies, Ethan. You've manipulated my life in ways I didn't even realize. How am I supposed to trust you now?" The silence between them was deafening. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I need time," she said firmly. "Time to figure out what's real and what's not. Please, just leave me alone for now." As she walked away, Ethan felt a hollow ache in his chest. He had feared this moment, but now that it had come, the pain was worse than he imagined. He sat on the bench long after she disappeared, knowing he had no one to blame but himself. The days that followed were the longest of Ethan's life. Amelia avoided the park entirely, leaving him alone on their bench, hoping she might return. The mornings felt colder without her, the familiar warmth of their conversations replaced by a gnawing emptiness. Determined not to give up, Ethan poured his energy into the foundation. He approved new initiatives, ensuring they reached communities like Amelia's without interfering with his wealth. He met with families struggling with medical bills, listening to their stories and finding solutions. Each act felt like a small penance, though it did little to ease his guilt. Amelia, meanwhile, wrestled with her turmoil. Her mother, Nancy, noticed the shift immediately. "Why are you punishing yourself, Amelia?" Nancy asked one evening, her voice gentle but firm. "Because he lied to me," Amelia said, her frustration evident. "He made me feel like I could trust him, and it was all a facade." Nancy reached for her daughter's hand. "Do you think his feelings for you were a lie? Or the way he treated me and listened and cared?" Amelia hesitated, her resolve faltering. "I don't know what to believe." "Then don't focus on what he did wrong," Nancy said. "Focus on what he's doing now. Has he disappeared? Or is he still trying?" Amelia didn't answer, but her thoughts lingered on the memory of Ethan sitting on the bench, waiting for her even after she'd walked away. 1 week later, Amelia finally returned to the park. Ethan was there, as she expected, but something about him looked different. He was no longer dressed in disguise but seemed more vulnerable than ever. As she approached, Ethan stood, his expression cautious. "Amelia," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here to forgive you," she said quickly. "At least not yet. But I want to hear the truth. All of it." And so Ethan told her. He explained his first glimpse of her through the restaurant window, his decision to disguise himself, and every act of kindness he'd orchestrated behind the scenes. He admitted his guilt, his fear, and the depth of his feelings for her. "I know I don't deserve your trust," he said, "but I'm willing to spend as long as it takes to earn it back." Amelia studied him, her heart torn between anger and hope. "You can't undo what's already been done," she said softly. "But if we move forward, it has to be as equals. No more secrets, no more lies." Ethan nodded, his relief evident. "No more lies, I promise." Their path was uncertain, the wounds of deception still raw. But as they sat on the bench, sharing tea and conversation again, a flicker of hope began to take root. They were genuinely starting over for the first time, not as strangers, a billionaire and a woman struggling to make ends meet, but as two people willing to fight for something real. The park bench, once the symbol of deception, now became a place of tentative healing. Ethan and Amelia met every morning, their conversations quieter but no less meaningful. The layers of their relationship had shifted. Vulnerability replaced the mystery, and honesty, though painful, became their foundation. Amelia still wrestled with the complexities of her feelings. She couldn't deny that Ethan's actions had eased her life in ways she could never have imagined. Her mother's treatments were progressing, and Amelia had the chance to explore her dream of painting for the first time in years. Yet, the sting of his initial deception lingered, reminding how easily trust could be broken. One morning, as the sun filtered through the trees, Amelia arrived at their bench with 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Ethan, her expression softer than it had been in weeks. "You've been quiet lately," she said, watching him stir his tea absent-mindedly. Ethan glanced at her, the weight of unspoken words in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he admitted, "about what you said, about us being equals." Amelia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And I realized that everything I've done, every attempt to fix things, has been about control. I thought I was helping, but maybe I was just trying to make myself feel less guilty." "That's a start," she said cautiously, though his honesty surprised her. Ethan took a deep breath. "I don't want just to fix your problems, Amelia. I want to be part of your life, but only if you'll let me." For a long moment, Amelia didn't respond. Then, she smiled faintly. "You're learning, Ethan, but this isn't something you can rush. Trust takes time." He nodded, accepting her words with quiet humility. "Then I'll wait, as long as it takes." As the weeks passed, Ethan became more integrated into Amelia's world. He accompanied her to art classes, where he sat awkwardly among amateur painters, laughing at his clumsy attempts to create anything resembling art. The simplicity of these moments, the shared jokes, the accidental splatters of paint, brought a new dimension to their relationship. Amelia, too, began to see a different side of Ethan. He wasn't just the billionaire who had lied to her. He was a man learning to let go of his defenses, to be vulnerable in ways that didn't come naturally. When he stumbled, he admitted his mistakes. When she needed space, he respected it. Slowly but surely, the walls between them began to crumble. Once dominated by boardrooms and bottom lines, Ethan's life now revolved around something more meaningful. With Amelia's encouragement, he restructured his foundation to focus on grassroots initiatives. He spent time in community centers, meeting the very people his wealth was helping. It was a humbling experience that reshaped his understanding of what success meant. One day, Amelia invited Ethan to her apartment for the first time. The modest space was filled with her paintings, each a reflection of the beauty she saw in the world. Ethan marveled at her talent, his admiration evident. "These are incredible," he said, gently running his fingers over a canvas's edge. "Why didn't you pursue this sooner?" Amelia shrugged, a hint of sadness in her smile. "Life got in the way. There was always something more urgent, a bill to pay, a shift to cover." Art felt selfish. "It's not selfish to follow your dreams," Ethan said softly. "You deserve to do something that makes you happy." Amelia glanced at him, her green eyes searching his. "And what about you, Ethan? What makes you happy?" He hesitated, then smiled. "This, being here with you, knowing I'm finally doing something real." Their conversation was interrupted by Nancy, who shuffled into the living room with a warm smile. She greeted Ethan as if he were an old friend, her frailty tempered by a lively wit that reminded him of Amelia. "So, you're the man who's been stealing my daughter's mornings," Nancy teased, settling into her chair. "I've been meaning to thank you for everything." Ethan flushed, humbled by her words. "It's the least I could do," he said honestly. Nancy's gaze softened.
"No, Ethan.
"What you've done goes beyond charity. You've given us hope. I'm truly grateful." But not everyone was as forgiving as Nancy. News of Ethan's relationship with Amelia began to leak into the media, sparking rumors and speculation. Tabloids painted her as a Cinderella figure, while critics questioned Ethan's motives. The scrutiny was relentless, threatening to overshadow the progress they'd made. One evening, as they walked through the park, Ethan turned to Amelia, his frustration evident. "I don't care what they say about me," he said, "but I hate that they're dragging you into this." Amelia shrugged, her resilience shining through. "Let them talk. They don't know me, Ethan. They don't know us." Her words steadied him, but the challenge remained. How could they bridge the gap between their two worlds without losing themselves? Ethan found an answer in an unlikely place. While visiting a community center, he met a young boy named Leo, who dreamed of opening a library in his neighborhood. The boy's enthusiasm reminded Ethan of Amelia's passion for art and desire to make a difference. Inspired, Ethan proposed a new initiative, a community space that combined Amelia's artistic vision with his resources. Together, they planned a project to house an art gallery, a library, and a cafe, all designed to uplift the neighborhood and celebrate the stories of people like Amelia. The project became their shared mission, symbolizing their commitment to each other and the community. It wasn't just about healing their relationship. It was about creating something lasting, something meaningful. On the day of the grand opening, the space was filled with people from all walks of life. Amelia's paintings adorned the walls, each with a story of resilience and hope. Nancy led a literary workshop in the library, her voice strong despite her frailty. And Ethan, standing by Amelia's side, felt a sense of fulfillment he'd never known. Amelia turned to Ethan as the crowd dispersed, her smile warm but tinged with vulnerability. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me, for believing in us." Ethan took her hand, his voice steady. "You're the one who taught me how to believe, Amelia." At that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together. They knew their journey was far from over, but they faced the future with unwavering hope for the first time. Two worlds united by love, trust, and the extraordinary power of redemption. The grand opening of the community space marked a new chapter in Ethan and Amelia's lives, but with it came a storm of public attention. What began as whispers in tabloids quickly escalated into full-blown media coverage. Articles painted Amelia as a modern-day Cinderella, accusing her of using Ethan for his wealth. Paparazzi lurked outside her apartment, snapping photos that distorted the truth into a spectacle. This was nothing new for Ethan. He'd lived under the microscope of public scrutiny for years. But for Amelia, the sudden invasion of her privacy was a cruel reminder of how their worlds clashed. One evening, as they sat in her tiny living room, Amelia tossed a tabloid onto the coffee table. The headline read, "Millionaire's Secret Girlfriend, Gold Digger or Genuine?" Her face, captured mid-laugh during a walk with Ethan, was plastered across the page. "I can't do this, Ethan," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't sign up to have my life dissected like this." Ethan leaned forward, his hand covering hers. "I know it's unfair, Amelia, and I hate that you're going through this because of me. But don't let them make you doubt yourself or us." Amelia pulled her hand away, standing to pace the room. "It's not just about me. It's my mom, my friends. They're dragging everyone I care about into this circus." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd spent his career mastering damage control, but this felt different. This was personal. "Then we'll fight back," he said firmly. "Not with lawyers or PR teams, but by showing them who you are. Who we are." Amelia stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "And how do we do that?" Ethan smiled faintly. "By living our lives, Amelia. By proving that what we have is real, no matter what they say." The next day, Ethan called a press conference that surprised the media and his closest advisors. Standing in front of the community space he and Amelia had built, he calmly addressed the crowd. "I've spent my life building businesses, expanding empires, and managing public perceptions," he began. "But the most important thing I've ever done has nothing to do with boardrooms or balance sheets. It's what I've learned from Amelia Clark, someone who has taught me the value of authenticity, resilience, and kindness." He paused, his gaze steady as cameras flashed. "Amelia isn't just the woman I love. She's my partner in building something meaningful, this community space, these initiatives, this dream. And no headline or rumor will ever change that." Amelia, standing beside him, felt the weight of his words. For the first time, she realized that Ethan wasn't just fighting for their relationship. He was fighting for her dignity, her truth. The press conference didn't stop the gossip entirely but shifted the narrative. Slowly, the media turned its attention to the impact of their work. The lives changed by the community space, the families benefiting from Ethan's foundation, and the art Amelia was creating. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. Despite the challenges, Ethan and Amelia grew more potent as a couple, and their bond deepened by the trials they faced. But the turning point came on a quiet afternoon at the community space. Amelia was in the art gallery, preparing for an upcoming exhibit featuring local artists. Ethan entered, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Amelia asked, eyeing the package with suspicion. "Open it," Ethan said, his expression unusually shy. Amelia unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully framed painting, one of her works. It was a landscape she'd painted during their early days at the park, capturing the sunlight filtering through the trees onto the bench where they had first met. "I found it in the storage room at the community center," Ethan explained. "I thought it deserved a proper frame." Amelia traced the edge of the frame, her heart swelling. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But why this one?" "Because it reminds me of where everything started," Ethan said, stepping closer. "It symbolizes how far we've come, and how much more we can do together." Amelia looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You believe in us, don't you?" "More than anything," Ethan replied. "But this isn't just about me. It's about you, Amelia. Your art, your dreams, your voice. You're not just my partner. You're my inspiration." For the first time since the truth about Ethan's identity had come to light, Amelia felt the last remnants of doubt melt away. His love wasn't about control or guilt, but about admiration, respect, and a shared vision for the future. That evening, they visited Amelia's mother, Nancy, who had been watching their relationship unfold with quiet approval. Over tea, Nancy smiled knowingly as she watched Ethan help Amelia clean up after dinner. "You know," Nancy said, turning to Amelia, "I think this young man has finally figured it out." "Figured what out?" Amelia asked, glancing at Ethan. "That love isn't about grand gestures or fixing problems," Nancy said. "It's about showing up daily, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Ethan met Nancy's gaze, his expression earnest. "I'm still learning," he admitted. "But I promise you, I'll never stop trying." Nancy nodded, her eyes twinkling. "That's all we can ask for." In the following weeks, Amelia's art gained recognition, not because of Ethan's influence, but because of its raw, emotional depth. Her pieces, many inspired by the park and the community, resonated with people in ways she never expected. Ethan, meanwhile, continued to focus on expanding the foundation's initiatives, drawing on what he'd learned from Amelia to guide his decisions. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, arguments born from their vastly different backgrounds, and the occasional sting of public scrutiny. But through it all, they chose each other every single day. On the anniversary of the community space's opening, Ethan surprised Amelia with a small gathering at the park. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered around their bench, now adorned with a simple plaque that read, "Where kindness began." As the sun set over the park, casting a golden glow on the faces of those they had touched, Ethan turned to Amelia, taking her hand. "This isn't the end of our story," he said softly. "It's just the beginning." Amelia smiled, her heart full. "And this time, no more secrets." Ethan nodded. "Only honesty, trust, and a lot of breakfast on this bench." Their laughter mingled with the park's sounds, children playing, leaves rustling, and the quiet hum of a community brought together by love, resilience, and a simple act of kindness. The following months tested Ethan and Amelia's resolve in ways neither had anticipated. The community space flourished, but with success came new challenges. More people sought help, and the programs expanded faster than Ethan had predicted. The demand was overwhelming, stretching the resources of both the foundation and the local volunteers. One evening, Ethan returned to Amelia's apartment after a long day of meetings. His usually sharp suit was rumpled, and his expression was exhausted. He sank onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. "We had to postpone the launch of the new health clinic," he admitted, his voice heavy. "Funding delays, zoning issues. It's a mess." Amelia handed him a cup of tea, sitting beside him. "You're trying to do too much at once, Ethan. Maybe it's time to scale back." He shook his head. "I can't. People are counting on us." Amelia placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "You can't help everyone overnight. Remember what we talked about? Real change happens one step at a time." Her words calmed him, but they also stirred a more profound realization. Ethan had defined his worth for so long by his ability to solve problems and fix things. But Amelia reminded him that it wasn't just about results. The journey, the effort, and the connections they built along the way. The next day, Ethan took Amelia's advice. He gathered his team at the foundation's headquarters, outlining a more sustainable approach to their initiatives. Instead of spreading themselves thin, they would focus on strengthening their existing programs, ensuring their long-term success. Amelia, too, faced her challenges. Her art, once a private escape, was now in high demand. Galleries sought to display her work, and invitations to exhibitions poured in. But with success came pressure, a fear of losing the authenticity that had defined her journey. One afternoon, as she prepared for her first solo exhibit, Amelia confided in Ethan. "What if I can't keep up?" she asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. "What if I lose what makes my art special?" Ethan took her hands in his gaze steady. "You won't, because your art isn't about perfection. It's about heart." And that's something you'll never lose. His faith in her reignited her confidence. And when the day of the exhibit arrived, Amelia stood proudly before her work. The gallery was filled with visitors, many of whom had been touched by her journey. Ethan watched from the corner of the room, his heart swelling with pride as he saw Amelia shine. Ethan and Amelia remained committed to their shared mission despite their individual successes. They continued to bridge the gap between their two worlds, finding ways to integrate their strengths. Ethan invited Amelia to join the foundation's board, a decision that surprised both the team and the media. She knows this community better than anyone, he explained during the announcement. Her insight is invaluable. Amelia, initially hesitant, quickly found her voice. She brought fresh ideas, challenged traditional approaches, and advocated for initiatives prioritizing people over profits. Her influence reshaped the foundation, earning the respect of even the most skeptical board members. Their partnership extended beyond the professional. They began hosting monthly events at the community space, inviting people from all walks of life to share their stories. These gatherings became a cornerstone of their efforts, fostering a sense of unity and purpose. One such event stood out, a storytelling night where residents shared personal experiences of resilience. Amelia's mother, Nancy, spoke about her journey as a teacher and her fight against illness. Her words moved the room to tears, inspiring a renewed sense of hope. As the evening wound down, Ethan took the stage. He spoke not as a billionaire or a philanthropist, but as a man transformed by love. When I first met Amelia, he began, his voice steady, I was lost. I had everything I thought I wanted, but none of it felt real. She showed me a different way to see the world, a way that values kindness, connection, and authenticity above all else. His gaze shifted to Amelia, who sat in the front row, her eyes glistening with emotion. This community has given me more than I could ever repay. And because of all of you, I finally understand what it means to live truly. The audience erupted into applause, but for Ethan, the most meaningful response came from Amelia's smile, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come, strengthening their bond. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan and Amelia continued to build a life rooted in trust and shared purpose. Their relationship wasn't without challenges. Ethan's demanding schedule and Amelia's growing responsibilities sometimes pulled them in different directions. But they had learned to communicate, to prioritize what truly mattered. One evening, as they walked through the park, Ethan paused by their bench. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. I know we've been through a lot, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. And I know I've made mistakes, but every step of this journey has brought me closer to you, to the person I want to be. Amelia's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. Amelia Clark, he said, dropping to one knee. Will you marry me? Not because of what we've built together, but because of who you are, the woman who taught me to see the world differently, to be better. I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of your love. Tears streamed down Amelia's face as she nodded. Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times, yes. Their embrace was met with cheers from passers-by, who had unknowingly witnessed the culmination of a journey defined by honesty, resilience, and a love that had bridged every divide. The months leading up to Ethan and Amelia's wedding were a whirlwind of joy and preparation. True to their shared values, the couple chose to forgo a grand, opulent ceremony in favor of something more intimate and meaningful. The venue was a community garden near the park bench where their story began, now transformed into a lush sanctuary of flowers and greenery. Amelia took an active role in planning every detail, ensuring the day reflected their journey. Local artists contributed handmade decorations, and the catering was provided by the very restaurants Amelia had once delivered for. Ethan's foundation sponsored the event not as a display of wealth, but as a way to include the community they had worked so hard to uplift. On the morning of the wedding, Amelia stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the delicate lace of her dress. Nancy entered the room, her strength restored after months of treatment, carrying a small box. This belonged to my mother, Nancy said, opening the box to reveal an antique locket. Inside was a photo of a young Nancy holding baby Amelia. "I want you to wear it today so you carry a piece of our family W." Amelia's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. "Thank you, Mom, for everything." As the ceremony began, the garden buzzed with warmth and laughter. Amelia walked down the aisle accompanied by Nancy while Ethan stood waiting, his eyes never leaving her. The vows they exchanged were deeply personal, written from the heart. "I met you as a stranger on a bench," Amelia said, her voice steady but emotional. "What I didn't know then was that you would become the person who taught me to trust again, to dream again. I promise to always believe in us, no matter what." Ethan smiled, his voice soft but sure. "Amelia, you showed me a world beyond wealth and power. You reminded me of what truly matters: kindness, honesty, and love. I vow to honor you, to support you, and to always fight for us." As they exchanged rings, the audience erupted in applause. Friends, family, and community members celebrated the union of two people and the merging of two worlds, one defined by privilege and the other by resilience. Ethan and Amelia's marriage wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a shared legacy. Together, they focused on expanding the community space, transforming it into a network of centers across the city. Each one offered art programs, literacy workshops, and healthcare initiatives inspired by Amelia's struggles and her resilience. Amelia's art career also flourished. Her paintings were featured in galleries far beyond their city, but she remained deeply connected to her roots. She used her platform to mentor young artists, ensuring they had opportunities she had once dreamed of. One of her most celebrated pieces was a portrait of the park bench, surrounded by sunlight and flowers, a tribute to where it all began. Ethan, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. He stepped back from his corporate empire, delegating more responsibilities to trusted advisors and devoted himself to the foundation. He spent his days visiting the centers, listening to stories, and finding ways to help. For the first time in years, he felt truly fulfilled. Their personal life was no less rewarding. A year after their wedding, Amelia gave birth to a baby girl they named Hope, a name that reflected everything they had built together. Nancy doted on her granddaughter, often reading to her from the books that had once inspired Amelia. A full-circle moment. One sunny afternoon, Ethan, Amelia, and Hope visited the park bench where their story began. Hope toddled ahead, her laughter filling the air as she tried to catch a butterfly. Ethan watched her, his heart full. "Do you ever think about that first morning?" Amelia asked, sitting beside him. Ethan nodded. "Every day. I wonder how different my life would have been if I hadn't seen you." Amelia smiled, her hand resting on his. "It wasn't just you, Ethan. It was us. We found each other when we needed it most." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Hope play. Around them, the park buzzed with life. Joggers, families, and artists sketching under the trees. The plaque on the bench, inscribed with the words, "Where kindness began," gleamed in the sunlight. Amelia leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder as the afternoon turned to evening. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Ethan kissed the top of her head, his voice soft but sure. "And we've only just begun." The legacy they left behind. Years later, the community space network they built thrived, touching countless lives. Amelia's paintings adorned the walls of the centers, each one telling a story of hope and transformation. Ethan's foundation grew into a global initiative, but its mission remained the same: to help people at the ground level, where it mattered most. Their story became a source of inspiration, a reminder that love, honesty, and resilience could bridge even the widest divides. And for those who sat on the park bench beneath the sunlight filtering through the trees, the words on the plaque were a quiet but powerful reminder of what could grow from a single act of kindness.